To me, horror movies in the 80s were always the cinematic equivalent of a roller coaster. It's not about the ups and downs, no. It's about the anticipation of fear. There's an eerily similar moment while you're waiting in line at the video store to check out a horror movie that is very similar to the feeling you get while you're waiting in line to board a roller coaster. Your mind races with thoughts of, should I be doing this? Is this as scary as it really looks? Overcoming that anticipation of fear becomes a badge of honor. You either become the first person who conquers it and can spread the word, or you're one of the people that are chasing after tales of grandeur told you by others. But that's part of the charm of horror movies, the hit and miss nature of the genre. But it's not all about the hits and misses. Horror can be seen as an art form and can elevate the genre. Or it can be seen as a down and dirty gore fest that appeals to a small number of rabid fans. No matter what category it falls into, it's the anticipation of the fear, gore, shock, and even humor that make it universal. The same can still be said about roller coasters. Well, hopefully not the gore part. Hello friends, and welcome to sentiMENTAL. This is the show where I just talk. I just talk about certain topics, certain things, and this time I'm going to talk about some of my earliest memories of horror movies in the 1980s. Now, to be completely honest, I would make a horrible film reviewer. First off, I tend to like everything. I also am horrible with names, dates, places, and things that some people find important when discussing movies. So in lieu of doing a list or a review or any of that kind of gobbledygook, I'm just going to talk about some of my earliest memories of 80s horror. And one of my earliest memories is of a movie called The Changeling. Released in 1980, this movie starred George C. Scott as a recent widower. When the movie begins, we see that he has lost his wife and daughter to a horrible car accident. Sometime later, he moves into a huge mansion all by himself. And that's when the fun begins. Everything from the ball that his daughter had starts bouncing down the stairs. He's woken up at night by deafening pounding noises. It was pretty scary stuff for me at the time. I was probably 4 or 5 when I saw it, but the image that stands out most to me, still to this day, is when, and I'll just say right now, spoilers for movies that are 30 plus years old, but anyway, spoilers, that when they go to find the body of a child that has been murdered many years before, it is buried under the floorboards of a house. And it's actually in a little girl's bedroom. And she talks about seeing a ghost child when they meet this girl. But when they dig up the floorboards, you see the body, and it transposes the dead little boy when he was drowned. It kind of, for some reason, that image still sticks with me to this day. Now, a lot of my other experiences with horror when I was really young came from the power of satellite TV. And this is the time when the satellites were in your yard and they were huge. are nothing like the little satellite dishes you see today on people's houses. These were huge, industrial, talk-to-alien-sized satellite dishes. My aunt and uncle had one, and whenever I would go visit them, they would always have a horror movie playing. Some of the ones that I remember and I saw later on in life, well, some of them, not all of them, but as a kid, they were just small little encapsulated moments of horror that jingled around inside my head. The first one was a movie from 1982 called Alone in the Dark. I don't remember much about the movie, but one scene still echoes in my brain, and that is a hockey-masked serial killer, which this movie came out a few months after Friday the 13th Part 3, when Jason finally dons his hockey mask, was when this hockey-masked murderer, uses a small garden rake, like the three-pronged thing, and slashes a dude across the face and across the neck. Just that scene, just that one, probably 5-second scene, stuck with me through most of my childhood till now. Another movie like that, and it took me time to just catch up to it to finally watch it, was the original Creepshow. The scene that I saw when I was little was the Ted Danson scene, when they're buried up to their necks in the beach. And that's not bad enough. I mean, as a kid, I just had questions as to why. But when they become zombies and come after the jilted husband, that still stands out in my mind. And it's a fantastic movie. I love that movie. But that scene will always be cemented into my brain because of seeing it at such a young age. There were other things like American Werewolf in London and The Howling. I can remember being on in the background when I was a kid. Like, my parents would go visit their friends and they would watch a movie and I would just be shooed off into the kitchen to play or color or whatever. And again, those were movies that I saw later, mostly when I was a teenager and I was really into horror movies and I consumed as much as I could, but nothing really specific. But there were moments there that still, like, again, here I am, horrible with names, but in American Werewolf in London, his friend that was killed, when he would visit him with his throat and face all slashed up and stuff and be funny. I remember those type of scenes. I don't remember much of the werewolf scenes. I do remember him being naked in the zoo and thinking that was funny when I saw it, but that's here nor there. There were also a lot of films I remember hearing kids talk about on the playground, like Children of the Corn, Cujo, Carrie, Christine, a lot of the Stephen King movies. They were talked about in hushed tones, and, you know, these kids were brave enough or had parents that allowed them to watch them on sleepovers and stuff, and I would be taken in by the mythology of it and just scared by what they were saying. I didn't even need to see those movies, and I was scared. And of course, one of the biggest, scariest movies that everyone had to watch because it was so super popular, which is weird considering how messed up it is Poltergeist. That movie, I mean, it became must-see viewing for everybody. And I remember sitting and watching it and not being able to handle it. Just glancing at my notes, I don't have a date for when it came out. I'd say, I mean, definitely early 80s, 82 era, maybe. But, I mean, that movie scared the crap out of me as a kid. And I probably haven't watched it since. I mean, when HBO would start airing that, and like Poltergeist 2 and eventually 3, back to back to back to back over summers, I finally watched it, and I was brave enough to, and I was really infatuated with the mythology of it, the imagery of it. It became not as scary to me. But it's been many years since then. It'd probably scare the crap out of me now watching it, with having kids and kids being plagued by these poltergeists and demons and stuff. That is probably the true sign of a classic. It wasn't until sometime later when I got bitten by the horror bug. Probably 84, 85, somewhere in that time. And one of the movies that really spoke to me was House. In House, William Catt, his son gets abducted by an unseen entity within this house. And as he tries to hunt for his son within the walls of this huge house, creepy stuff starts happening. This is a movie I would call a kitchen sink horror movie because it has humor, gore, the supernatural, monsters, ghosts, psychological things. It has everything that you could absolutely want in a horror movie. And I don't know what it was about House that I became fanatical about it, a fan of it. I mean, for one thing, the imagery of it was fantastic. The monsters, that winged demon thing in that weird abyssal area that he finds behind the bathroom mirror. Martin Mull's character of, or Richard Mull. They're two completely different people, and I'm sure I butchered it. But his undead zombie soldier, fantastic. The dude had an M60 in it too, and at that era of Rambo and G.I. Joe for me, dude, that seriously spoke to me. That movie was one of my favorites at that time. And it's because of that movie that I started getting into other horror movies. I mean, it's hard to categorize it as horror, which some people do, but Gremlins, another movie that its mythology, its marketing, its imagery was all perfect, and a great, I hate to use the word, but great desensitizer to scary things when you're a kid in the 80s. Add Ghostbusters to that, which falls more into the comedy genre of horror. I mean, horror doesn't even register when describing Ghostbusters, but I guess it would. If you would put it on a list somewhere, it would be in there. And that's one of the beautiful things about horror. It branches out into so many different things. When you read lists, there's this time of year especially of 20 must-see horror movies, and heck, I saw one that was 85 must-see horror movies. When you start lining up genres and making a huge spider web of things, it branches, of course, comedy and sci-fi and fantasy and drama. It's all over the map, with just the center being horror. So with a movie like Ghostbusters or Gremlins, they don't really register in the horror genre for me, but I guess they would because of their subject matter. Another movie that spoke to me to a degree was Stephen King's Cat's Eye. Now, there's a lot of human horror or psychological horror with some of the vignettes, but I always fast forward through all that junk to get to the end. And that was because of the troll. Dude, to this day, I will put him up there as one of my favorite movie monsters of all time. There's something so timeless and so... the whole mythology of cats stealing the breath of babies and how it was deconstructed to the cats are actually protecting the babies from trolls that come in the night and steal breath. But the cat always gets the blame. That was beautiful. That is an awesome little veer to the left of a folk tale or mythology, like I said. And that troll is just awesome. Of course, I can't talk about childhood horror without talking about two Disney movies that I talked about in a previous episode, but Something Wicked This Way Comes and Watcher in the Woods. Went into more detail of those in the previous episode, but again, these were Disney movies. Your parents are going to rent them for you because they're in the nice big white beautiful clamshell VHS box with Disney at the top of them. Little did anyone know how messed up they were. Watcher in the Woods, I mean, I have not seen that movie since being a kid, but it really casts a dark shadow on my memory of that movie to how scary and messed up it was. A little bit later, a lot of the little syndication channels in my area on Saturday afternoon would have horror movies. And this was sandwiched between usually the Kung Fu movie and some cooking show. And I don't remember there ever being a specific host, which I feel like I was robbed when you look at a lot of these cool horror hosts that dotted America's syndication channels. But they would just have horror movies. And some of the ones I remember seeing on that are Halloween 3 Season of the Witch, which freaked me out. Just the whole masks, folding in on themselves and snakes and bugs and all that stuff, that really freaked me out because it was kids getting hurt. So as a kid, seeing kids get hurt, that really spoke volumes to me. And I know it's hip to say it now, but I've always dug that movie. I wish Carpenter was allowed to make the Halloween franchise just standalone vignette type of movies like he planned. That would have been awesome. Anyway, so we have that. I saw The Stuff. That really freaked me out too. We had, what is it? Food of the Gods. That was an earlier movie, I think maybe 70s, late 70s, but that was pretty much shot on a green screen with animals that were now giant, mice and rabbits and stuff like that attacking people. I mean, really, truly ridiculous, but still kind of messed up. I remember seeing Piranha in those afternoon horror shows. The Pit. The Pit was one that still to this day gives me the creeps. I mean, that movie is just a total mind screw because you had the weird little boy with a teddy bear that talked to him, and the teddy bear tells him to take people out in the woods and throw them in this pit, which this pit has these little creatures in it called Trolologs. Granted, I've not seen this movie in decades. And that's creepy in itself. These little man-eating beasties in this pit that you don't really ever see. I think you see them later in the movie. But what really got me as a kid was, that was okay because it almost is like a revenge picture to a degree because the kid is bullied and stuff, so he starts taking out all the people that wronged him. So I could deal with that, but it wasn't until the end when the boy got sent to live somewhere else and he met this little girl and they're playing, and then she takes him out to a pit in the woods and pushes him in it, and that's how the movie ends. So how many pits are there out there with these little trolologs in them? Somebody's got to do something about that. Two other movies I remember seeing in this afternoon horror fest were Nightwing, where it's like the killer bats, and at the end of the movie they have a huge electrified fence around them and the bats are getting shocked and they're getting bit up on the hands and stuff. I remember that. And Gargoyles, which I thought was awesome. I loved the makeup effects on the gargoyles. I thought they were awesome. And they weren't outright villains in it. They had a story. So that I always loved. But the movie that I eventually saw that kind of, and today, it's one of my favorites. But at the time after seeing it, I was not allowed to watch horror movies for a while because of the nightmares that it gave me, was the movie Silver Bullet. Now you might find that funny because I think a lot of people think it's a cheesy movie. I don't, first off. Again, it's another Stephen King adaptation of his Cycle of the Werewolf novella, sorry. And with art by Bernie Wrightson, which is awesome. And reading that book was also what helped me get over it and love it. But again, it was a small American town like I lived in. Just the mood that certain scenes had, but what the moods that led up to one of Corey Haim's friends in the movie being killed by the werewolf is what got me. Because like I said, when you're a kid and you see bad things happen to kids, it speaks to you louder than anything. And in this movie, you don't even see the kid get killed. But what you see is he's flying a kite. And then later, when they find his body, which you don't see, you just see this kite with blood all over it. And that was enough. I remember after seeing it, I was shipped off to my aunt's for a sleepover weekend, which was just for my parents to have a break from me. But being totally freaked out and asking if their door was strong enough, you know, would it get through the windows? I mean, I totally was going bonkers. And I remember for like months I was having nightmares about it. Anyway, like I said, this is sentimental. This is just a chance for me to blab, just to talk. Like I said, I'm not good enough with movies or reviews or describing them to do a whole, hey, these are the movies you should watch for Halloween or anything like that. So I just thought I would talk about the movies that I guess helped shape the horror fan that I am today. Which, to be honest, recently I don't seek out horror like I used to. I mean, when we had the video stores, I would comb through the aisles looking for ones that I hadn't heard of, or ones that I had heard of in hushed tones because they were really nasty. And, you know, watching them. I mean, this of course 90s when I, you know, all the Evil Dead movies I loved, Puppet Master movies. I mean, I gravitated towards these movies that seemed to have a mythology around them. Not ones that were just like, hey, I'm just a dude with an axe and I'm going to go hack on people. I liked movies that had a fantasy element to it almost. But anyway, let's save that for another day. Anyway, I hope you liked this episode. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. And if you got something to say, leave me a comment. I love reading them and I love getting back to all of you guys. And if you're new around here and you liked this episode, or any of these ones that it's recommending below me right now, hit the subscribe button. And if you hit that little bell, you'll be notified whenever there's a new episode. But until next time, keep being rad and stay dorky.